My friends, let us begin this hour together by looking honestly and quietly at a question that lives in the heart of nearly every spiritual seeker. Why is it that after years of praying, years of meditating, years of doing everything we believe to be right and holy, we still find ourselves longing for a breakthrough? Why does it seem that the very thing we desire most, peace, guidance, healing, release, somehow remains just beyond our grasp? You see, if we are willing to pause for a moment and look deeply, we will discover that most of our spiritual life has been built upon a subtle assumption that is never spoken, yet governs almost every prayer we utter. It is the assumption that we are here, in need, in lack, and that somewhere else, far off, above us, beyond us, is a God who must be persuaded to answer, who must be called to act, who must be moved to provide. And so we ask, we plead, we affirm, we declare, all with the hope that perhaps this time the heavens will open. But I must tell you gently that the harder we try, the more we strain, the more desperate we become, the farther we seem to drift from the very presence we seek. For spiritual answers do not come to the mind that is busy seeking them. Spiritual fulfillment does not enter a consciousness filled with anxious asking. The grace of God does not flow into a heart that is trying to wring blessing out of the infinite. And so we come to this paradox. All our striving, all our spiritual effort, all our attempts to reach God may very well be the very barrier that keeps us from realizing God. I am not speaking theory. I am speaking from experience, from years of discovering that nothing is withheld from us except by our own belief that we must attain it. And so in this hour, I invite you to join me in a new approach, a gentler approach, the way of recognition, not the way of pleading with God, not the way of wrestling with problems, but the quiet acknowledgement that the presence we seek is already here, that the life we desire is already within us, that the answers we have been begging for have never once been absent. Let us journey together into the truth that spiritual breakthrough does not come when we convince God to enter our experience. Spiritual breakthrough comes when we become still enough to notice that God has never been missing from it. In this stillness, in this recognition, we begin to perceive that every good we have ever sought is already present, already functioning, already complete. And so we begin. Now, as we continue on this path together, let us come face to face with the root of nearly all spiritual frustration. It is not the lack of God's presence, nor the absence of answers, nor some divine delay in responding to our needs. No, the great obstacle, the great veil, is far more subtle. It is the deeply ingrained belief that we exist apart from God, that somehow God is there and we are here, and that our prayer must bridge a vast and silent distance. This belief in separation is not something we consciously choose. It is absorbed from the world around us, inherited from centuries of human thought, reinforced by fears, and upheld by the mind that sees itself as isolated, incomplete, and vulnerable. And it is from this sense of separation that all pleading arises, all striving begins, all anxious seeking takes form. For if I believe myself to be separate, then of course I must reach outward for help. Of course I must beg. Of course I must struggle. The very act of asking becomes an admission. I lack. I am without. I must attain. But listen carefully. Every prayer that begins with separation ends in frustration. Every spiritual effort that assumes God is elsewhere becomes entangled in its own false premise. You cannot receive from a God you believe is far away. You cannot know peace if you begin by assuming the absence of peace. You cannot feel God's presence while holding the conviction that God must be summoned. In reality, in spiritual reality, there is no separation. There never has been. There is not a God somewhere out in the heavens, answering from a distance. There is only the one presence, the one life, the one consciousness, expressing itself as you, through you, and within you. Everything else is illusion, born of fear and conditioned thought. The moment you accept the possibility, just the possibility that you are not a separate being reaching toward God, but an expression of God's own being, the entire landscape of spiritual life changes. Prayer is no longer a cry upward. It becomes a recognition inward. Meditation is no longer an effort to reach something beyond yourself. It becomes an awakening to what is already here. Spiritual healing is no longer the attempt to bring wholeness into a broken situation. It becomes the unveiling of wholeness that was always present beneath the appearance. You see, separation is not a sin, it is a misunderstanding. And misunderstandings dissolve not through effort, but through illumination. When this realization dawns, even faintly, you begin to notice a quiet shift. The compulsion to ask softens. The fear that God is distant fades, and a gentle awareness begins to rise within. I am not alone. I am not abandoned. I am not separate. This recognition is the first crack in the shell of the old consciousness, the first opening through which truth can shine. From here, everything changes. Let us move a little deeper now and examine why all our earnest effort, all our pleading, forcing, and spiritual exertion so often leaves us feeling exhausted rather than uplifted, anxious rather than assured. It is not that effort is bad, nor that sincerity is unwelcome. No sincere search for God is ever wasted, but effort, as the human mind understands it, belongs to the realm of the personal, the limited, the finite, and spirit does not reveal itself to a consciousness vibrating with strain. You see, the human mind imagines that the more intensely it tries, the closer it must be to God. But the truth is precisely the opposite. The more we try, the more we affirm the belief that something is missing. The more we strain, the more we reinforce the idea that the divine is distant. The more emotional energy we pour into our asking, the more clearly we confess that we do not yet believe. This is why Joel would say, God cannot enter a mind that is already full of its own thoughts. Not because God is unwilling, but because a mind crowded with effort, noise, and self-directed striving leaves no room for the gentle whisper of truth. Effort becomes a wall made of worry, expectation, fear, and personal will. Consider this. If you were in a dark room, shaking the flashlight, turning it wildly in every direction, insisting that the light must appear immediately, you would miss the very thing you are trying to see. It is only when the hand becomes steady, when the movement stops, when the mind grows quiet, that the light can shine without distortion. So it is with spiritual realization. Goldsmith often used the analogy of a radio. The music does not begin when the radio turns on. The music is already filling the atmosphere. The radio's only function is to tune itself so that it may receive what is already present. But what happens when we twist the dial with frantic impatience, jumping from one station to another, fearful that we might miss the right frequency? We miss the broadcast entirely. We create our own static, our own noise. In the same way, when we beg God for an answer, we drown out the very guidance that is trying to reach us. When we strain for healing, we close the door to the peace that heals. When we demand supply, we blind ourselves to the abundance already flowing toward us. Effort is noise. Recognition is silence. Effort seeks God. Recognition beholds God. Effort says, something must change. Recognition says, truth is already present. And so I say to you, gently, there is nothing wrong with your desire for clarity, for healing, for direction, but begin to notice the inner movement behind your desire. Are you straining to make something happen? Are you trying to push God into action? Are you forcing your mind to produce spiritual results? If so, pause, be still. Remember, you are not trying to get God to enter your life. You are learning to become aware of the presence that is never left. When the mind relaxes its effort, when the heart eases its demands, when the will surrenders its insistence in that holy quiet, the answer reveals itself, not through your striving, but through your stillness. Now let us step into one of the most liberating truths ever revealed to the awakened heart. A truth so simple, so direct, and yet so revolutionary that when it is understood, even faintly, the entire nature of spiritual life is transformed. I speak of what I call the principle of the divine already. For centuries, human thought has imagined that God begins to act when we pray, that heaven awakens at the moment of our request, that spiritual power is released only when we call upon it. But listen closely. This is a human picture, born of human reasoning. It is not reality. In spiritual truth, God is not waiting to be summoned. God is not responding from afar. God is not activated by our words or stirred into motion by our needs. God is already fully present, fully active, fully complete, not partially, not sometimes, not when conditions improve, but eternally, unchangingly, wholly present in every moment. The problem is not that God withholds. The problem is that we do not recognize. Imagine for a moment a room filled with sunlight. The light is radiant, warm, abundant, filling every corner, illuminating everything it touches. Now imagine pulling heavy curtains across the window. The sunlight does not stop shining. The sun does not withdraw its rays. The room appears dark only because something within the room is blocking our awareness of the light. In the same way, the divine does not come and go. It does not increase with our prayers or diminish with our silence. It is our consciousness, our inner curtains of fear, effort, expectation, and separation that hide the ever-present radiance of spirit. This is why Scripture declares, before they call, I will answer, not after they cry out long enough, not when the prayer is strong enough, but before the question, before the need, before the thought. The activity of God is not triggered by human effort. It is recognized by spiritual awareness. This is the divine already. The healing you seek, already present in the wholeness of spirit, the supply you long for, already flowing in the infinite provision of consciousness, the guidance you pray for, already whispering in the stillness of your inner being, the peace you crave, already established at the center of your soul. You are not bringing God into a situation. You are awakening to the God that is already there. And so when we say, God, help me, we reveal a misunderstanding, For God is already the life within us, the love surrounding us, the wisdom directing us. The plea arises only from the mind that does not yet see. But the moment recognition dawns, even for a breath, even for a heartbeat, there is a shift, a subtle dissolving of fear, a quiet unburdening of the soul, a sense gentle yet unmistakable. Ah, God is here. God has always been here. When that awareness blossoms, the problem begins to melt of its own accord. Not through your manipulation, but because the light has been allowed to enter. This is the meaning of spiritual demonstration. Not making something happen, but perceiving what eternally is. Let us hold this truth tenderly. The divine already is not a theory. It is the very nature of reality, waiting only for your recognition. And now, having seen that all spiritual good is already present, let us move gently into the heart of true practice, the art of stillness, not the stillness that the world imagines, not a forced quieting of the mind, not an attempt to silence every thought, but the stillness that arises through recognition, through remembrance, through the simple awareness that God is here. You see, my friends, the purpose of spiritual practice is not to reach God, nor to attract God, nor to convince God of our sincerity. The purpose of spiritual practice is to remove from our own consciousness whatever obscures our awareness of the presence that is already active within us. Therefore, we do not approach stillness as a discipline or a technique. We approach it as an opening, a yielding, a resting. True stillness begins the moment we stop trying to make something happen. As long as we are attempting to force inner peace, we are still operating from the belief that peace is absent. As long as we are trying to bring healing into the body, we are still holding the conviction that wholeness is missing. As long as we are manipulating thought to attract supply, we are affirming lack. No, stillness is not effort. Stillness is consent. Stillness is agreement with reality. Stillness is the soul whispering, yes, God is here. This is why I have often spoken of resting in the word, not repeating it as a mental formula, not using it to push away thoughts, but dwelling in it as one dwells in sunlight. To rest in the word is to allow a spiritual truth to saturate consciousness until it becomes more real to us than the appearance that confronts us. We take a truth such as, I and the Father are one, or where I am, God is, or Spirit is the life of my being, and we do not use these truths as tools for achieving a result. We simply sit with them, we let them be present in our awareness, we hold them lightly, reverently, quietly, not trying to believe them, not trying to convince ourselves, but simply allowing their meaning to unfold. In this resting, thought slows of its own accord. Not because we forced it to, but because the mind begins to yield to the deeper rhythm of spirit. The anxious impulse to fix, to control, to improve softens. In that softening, a space opens, and into that space, the presence flows, not from somewhere outside, but from within your own being. You do not feel a dramatic change. You feel a subtle shift, a gentle peace, a quiet recognition that something greater than thought has taken the helm. This is stillness, not emptiness, but fullness. Not silence, but awareness. Not passivity, but receptivity. And from this stillness, guidance reveals itself without effort. Healing unfolds without struggle. Supply appears without strain. Relationships harmonize without manipulation. Not because we made these things happen, but because we became receptive to the harmony that was already present. So let us remember, you cannot enter stillness through effort, for effort belongs to the personal sense of self. You enter stillness through recognition, through surrender, through the quiet willingness to rest in the truth of your oneness with God. Let us now allow these principles to take form in the realm where most of us feel the strain of daily living, for truth, my friends, is not abstract. It is not reserved for sacred spaces or spiritual retreats. Truth is practical. Truth is alive. Truth is the very substance of our experience when we allow it to reveal itself. And so let us look at how recognition, not effort, not pleading, not mental manipulation, quietly transforms life. I speak first of the individual burdened by financial fear. You know this fear well, the whisper that says, "There is not enough. I must secure my future. I must strive harder. I must make something happen." And so the mind races, anxiously searching for opportunities, calculating, worrying, anticipating loss. In this turmoil, there is no room for the still voice of guidance. The mind, in its panic, becomes blind to the very supply that is already unfolding. But when this individual begins, even for a moment, to rest in the truth, that supply is not external, that supply is the activity of spirit, the expression of infinite consciousness, something changes. They are no longer fixated on the problem. They are no longer trying to force a solution. Instead, they sit quietly and acknowledge, God is the abundance of my being. All that is necessary is already present within the one life expressing as me. And in that awareness, the mind ceases to choke the flow. Opportunities that were previously invisible become clear. Ideas rise naturally. A direction appears. It is not that supply suddenly arrives. It is that the individual becomes aware of what was there all along. Consider another who struggles with physical discomfort or illness. Out of fear, this person battles the condition, resists it, tries to force healing, or uses spiritual practice as a weapon against pain. But healing does not respond to force. Healing does not yield to mental pressure. Healing is the natural activity of the divine wholeness that underlies all appearance. And so, when the sufferer becomes still, not denying the condition, but refusing to be intimidated by it, and rests in the awareness, spirit is the life of my body, spirit is the wholeness of my being, a transformation begins. The fear that intensifies the condition loosens its grip, peace enters, and in that peace, the healing process, which had always been present, begins to reveal itself. Another struggles with relationships, longing for love, peace, harmony, connection. They effort, they analyze, they attempt to change themselves or others, or they cling to rituals of affirmation to attract companionship or healing. Yet all the while they are affirming their own incompleteness. But when stillness dawns, and they recognize, I am already whole, I am already complete in God, I do not need to get love, I am the expression of love itself. Something subtle shifts. They stop seeking from emptiness. They begin meeting others from fullness. They stop grasping and start allowing. And in that transformation of consciousness, relationships naturally harmonize, not because people have changed, but because the individual's perception has, in each of these examples. Notice what is common. The outer condition did not change first. The individual did not use spiritual truth to force an outcome. Instead, they rested in awareness, and the outer situation reorganized itself around that recognition. And so I remind you, spiritual practice is not the attempt to fix appearance. It is the unveiling of reality. When you recognize the divine already, the appearance yields. When you rest in truth, the illusion dissolves. When you stop demanding, you begin receiving. For the world changes only when consciousness changes. And consciousness changes in the moment you recognize that God is already present, already functioning, already complete as the very essence of your being. Now, as we walk deeper into this sacred journey, it becomes important gently, honestly, to recognize the obstacles that naturally arise as consciousness shifts from effort to receptivity, from separation to oneness, from asking to recognizing. These obstacles are not signs of failure. They are not punishments, nor are they signs that truth is not working. They are simply remnants of the old consciousness, the old conditioning, the old way of seeing. And when we understand them, they lose their power. The first obstacle is impatience. Once we taste a moment of inner peace, once we glimpse the principle of the divine already, the human mind immediately says, "Now let it happen. Let the healing come. Let the supply appear. Let the condition change." It wants proof. It wants speed. It wants results. But my friends, spiritual unfoldment is not measured by time. Consciousness does not bloom on command. When you feel impatient, it is simply the old self returning, the self that believes outcomes depend on your effort or your timeline. And so when impatience appears, let it be a signal. Return to stillness. Return to the recognition that God is already functioning and that nothing needs to hurry. Another obstacle is the mind's tendency to form mental pictures of how the answer must appear. You may say, "I know God is my supply." But then the mind quietly insists, "And supply will come through this job, this opportunity, this person." Or you may say, "I trust in healing," while imagining exactly how the healing must unfold. But spiritual supply is infinite. It cannot be confined to one channel. Spiritual healing is whole. It cannot be limited to a single method. When we cling to mental pictures, we close the door to the infinite ways God may express. Therefore, when you catch yourself insisting on specific outcomes, gently release them. Open the hand, open the heart. Say within yourself, "This," or something far greater in the way that divine wisdom ordains. A third obstacle is the return of fear. Fear about the body, fear about money, fear about relationships, fear about the unknown. Fear often arises after we begin practicing truth, because truth brings to the surface all that must be dissolved. Do not be discouraged. Fear is not a personal enemy. It is an impersonal suggestion. It has no authority. When fear arises, do not fight it. Do not wrestle with it. Simply refuse to identify with it. Recognize, "This is not my fear. This is only the old consciousness trying to reassert itself." Then rest again in truth. Fear cannot survive in the presence of recognition. Another obstacle is the subtle belief that we must work for spiritual progress, that if nothing seems to change, we must not be doing enough. This is the voice of the personal self, the self that believes it has the power to bring God into manifestation. But spiritual realization is not achieved. It is revealed. Your practice is not the cause of God's activity. It is the clearing of the fog so that you may perceive what has always been true. When you feel tempted to work harder spiritually, pause. Let that old habit fall away. Return to the simplicity of resting in the Word. There is also the challenge of comparison. You may hear stories of rapid demonstration in the lives of others and wonder, why not me? What am I lacking? But each consciousness is unique, and each unfolds at its own sacred rhythm. No two journeys are the same. You are not behind. You are not delayed. You are simply unfolding in the exact way your soul requires. Trust the pace of your own awakening. And finally, there is the obstacle of appearances worsening before they dissolve. This, too, is something deeply misunderstood. Often, when truth begins to work in consciousness, the outer picture seems to intensify. Problems may appear larger, symptoms may seem stronger, finances may appear tighter, but this is not regression. It is the breaking up of the old form. It is the dissolving of the illusion. The appearance rises only to be released. The caterpillar dissolves before the butterfly emerges. Do not judge by appearances. Do not fear the temporary turbulence. Stand still. Rest. Recognize. Every obstacle is an invitation. Every challenge is a doorway. Every resistance is the old self releasing its hold. And through it all, the presence remains unchanged, unwavering, already here. No matter what arises, your refuge is always the same: stillness, recognition, and the quiet knowing that God is already functioning at the center of your being. Let us now turn to the great transformation, the shift from asking God for something to living from the awareness that God is already the substance, the intelligence, and the activity of your being. This shift is subtle. It does not announce itself with fireworks or spiritual drama. It comes quietly, gently, almost imperceptibly, and yet, once it dawns in consciousness, it changes the entire way you move through life. For as long as we ask God for things for healing, for supply, for direction, for protection, we are still thinking of God as something outside ourselves. We are still approaching the infinite as though it were separate from the life we are living, and in that very act, we place ourselves back in the realm of lack, of need, of striving. We become beggars at the gate of our own kingdom. But the moment we begin to recognize, even faintly, that all spiritual good is already present, that the kingdom is within us, that the presence is our own life, a new posture emerges. Asking becomes unnecessary, not because we no longer desire good, but because we perceive that good is the very nature of our being. Prayer becomes listening rather than pleading. Meditation becomes communion rather than effort. Life becomes a flowing expression of grace rather than a struggle to attain. You will notice this shift first in the small things where once you would anxiously ask, "What should I do? What decision should I make?" You will now pause, become still, and simply rest in the awareness that divine intelligence is already functioning through you. And in that resting, a direction will unfold not with the force of a command, but with the naturalness of an inner nudge, a gentle leaning, a quiet knowing that says, "This is the way." You will notice it when challenges arise. Where once you would cry out, "God, fix this, remove this, heal this," you will now remember God is already Here, wholeness is already the truth. You will sit in stillness, not to change the circumstance, but to recognize the presence within it. And as that recognition deepens, the outer appearance will shift not because you demanded change, but because the false sense of separation has dissolved. You will notice it in your relationships, where once you may have sought love or validation from others. You will begin to feel the fullness of love within you, expressing as you, and from that fullness, you approach others not to receive, but to give, not out of need, but out of abundance. And in that giving, harmony appears effortlessly. You will notice it in your sense of purpose. Where once life felt like a series of decisions you must make, battles you must fight, steps you must take, now you begin to feel carried. You begin to feel that life is living you, that something greater is moving through you, that you are being guided, led, and supported in ways the human mind could never fabricate. This is what it means to live by grace. Grace is not a reward. Grace is not a special intervention. Grace is the natural activity of God realized in consciousness, when you are no longer trying to make things happen, when you are no longer begging the infinite to intervene. You step into a new rhythm, the rhythm of trust, the rhythm of awareness. You begin to act, not from anxiety, but from inspiration. You begin to speak, not from fear, but from clarity. You begin to move, not from personal will, but from divine impulse. And life, my friends, begins to unfold with an ease, a harmony, a quiet beauty that the striving mind could never achieve. You discover that the answers were never far away. They were simply waiting for your recognition. You discover that God was never silent. You were simply too noisy inwardly to hear. You discover that healing was never withheld. It was simply overshadowed by fear. You discover that supply was never limited. It was simply unseen through the lens of lack. This is the shift. This is the spiritual awakening. This is the moment when you cease being the seeker and become the beholder, the witness to the divine activity already present in your life. And from this awareness, life becomes not something you struggle to manage, but something you gracefully receive moment by moment, breath by breath, revelation by revelation. And now, my friends, as we bring this period of contemplation to its close, let us gather the threads of truth that have been laid before us and return once more to the quiet center of our being. For all that we have spoken of, the end of striving, the dissolving of separation, the recognition of the divine already, the practice of stillness, the emergence of grace, all of it points to one simple, eternal reality. God is here. God has always been here, and nothing is required but our awareness of this fact. You began this journey perhaps with a sense of longing for answers, for change, for relief, for breakthrough. And that longing was sincere. It was the soul's own impulse, urging you toward higher understanding. But now you know that the fulfillment of longing does not come through greater intensity of effort. It comes through the quiet recognition that what you long for is already within you, whispering, waiting, ever present. If there is one truth to carry with you, let it be this: you do not need to persuade God. You do not need to convince God. You do not need to awaken God. You need only become aware of God. This awareness is your refuge. It is your strength. It is your peace. And it is available to you in any moment you choose to become still. So as you step back into the world of tasks and responsibilities, do not leave behind this inner sanctuary. Do not imagine that spiritual awareness belongs only to the hours of meditation. No, it is meant to permeate your day, to color your interactions, to guide your decisions, to reveal itself in the ordinary moments where you least expect it. When fear arises, return to recognition, God is here. When impatience stirs, return to stillness. All is already complete. When confusion appears, return to trust. The wisdom of spirit is living me. When lack suggests itself, return to truth. The fullness of God expresses as my life. Each return strengthens the awareness. Each recognition deepens the realization. Each moment of stillness unveils more of the divine activity already functioning in you. And so, as we leave this time together, I extend to you not a promise of future blessing, but an invitation to notice the blessing that surrounds you now, to notice the presence that enfolds you, to notice the peace that is nearer than your breath, to notice the truth that has followed you all along. You and the Father are one. May you walk gently in this awareness. May you trust the unfolding of your path. May you rest in the assurance that nothing is missing from your life, because nothing is missing from God. And may the still, small voice within you become louder than every fear, every doubt, every appearance. For the stillness you seek has always been within you, awaiting only your recognition.